Welcome to Eggs and Issues, a monthly business forum presented by the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce, bringing timely economic discussion to the region for nearly 40 years. Thank you to our sponsors and partners. Presenting sponsors, Bank of America and Martins Point Healthcare. Cooperating sponsor, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. Reception sponsors, Clark Insurance, Key Bank, and Pretty Flaherty. Community corner sponsor, Goral Palmer. Tomorrow's leaders and entrepreneur sponsors, AAA Northern New England and ProSearch. Coffee sponsor, Skowhegan Savings. Parking sponsor, Vitalius Real Estate Group. Media partners, radio sponsor, WGAN. Print sponsor, The Forecaster. TV sponsor, WMTW Maine CW. Business news sponsor, Maine Biz. With production support provided by Headlight. Venue partner, Holiday Inn by the Bay. And thank you to our special community partners, Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, MEMIC, Spectrum Healthcare Partners, Southern Maine Community College, and the University of Southern Maine. And now, please welcome Portland Community Chamber President, Britt Vitalius.
Good morning. It's great to see everyone. Welcome to the February 15th, 2023 Eggs and Issues, the monthly business breakfast series brought to you by the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce. My name is Britt Vitalius. I'm the owner of Vitalius Real Estate Group, and I'm honored to serve as volunteer president of the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank you all for joining us this month, the sixth installment of our 37th season of Eggs and Issues. We're so happy to be here in person with all of you today. This morning, we are joined by President of the University of New England, Dr. James Herbert. But before I invite him to the stage, I want to take a moment again to recognize each of the sponsors of Eggs and Issues who make this event possible. First and foremost, our presenting sponsors, Bank of America. And I want to just pause here to recognize that the recently retired Bill Williamson. Bill and the entire Bank of America team have been huge supporters of Eggs and Issues program, and we wish him an enjoyable and fulfilling retirement. So thanks, Bill. I don't think Bill's here this morning. He was here last month, but if you see him, please thank him. Their support is critical to what we do. Our other presenting sponsors, Martins Point Healthcare, Central Maine Power, and I also want to thank our other generous sponsors. Our cooperating sponsor, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, reception sponsors, Clark Insurance, Key Bank, and Pretty Flaherty, the community corner sponsor, Goral Palmer. Today's community corner is Kismet Rock Foundation. The Kismet Rock Foundation is an organization that nourishes the physical, intellectual, and emotional development of rural and urban children throughout New England as they enter their formative teen years. Their success in supporting the potential of children is accomplished by providing 4-year scholarships for a comprehensive education in technical rock climbing within the context of a stable and loving family-like atmosphere. Ara Morton is here today, or is out there somewhere. Please stop by and say hi. You can learn more about the program. There's Ara right up front. Thanks so much for being here. And if you'd like to support the Kismet Rock Foundation, visit kismetrockfoundation.org. Tomorrow's leaders and entrepreneur sponsors, AAA Northern New England and ProSearch. Through this program, the Chamber is able to offer students in the region, both high school and college level, an invitation to attend Eggs and Issues at no cost. I believe we have students from UNE, USM, and SMCC here today. If so, please stand and be recognized. Thanks for being here. Coffee sponsors, Skowhegan Savings. Our parking sponsor, Vitalius Real Estate Group. That's what I do before this starts, as I park cars. Special thank you to our media partners, The Forecaster, WGAN, WMTW Maine CW, and Maine Biz. Our FMI, for more information sponsor, is the Portland Public Library. Production support is provided by Headlight Audiovisual. And our venue today is the Holiday Inn by the Bay. A very special thank you to our special community partners who support all of our chamber initiatives, Anthem, Spectrum Healthcare Partners, University of Southern Maine Community College, and MEMIC. Let's have another round of applause for all of our generous sponsors. And now on to today's presentation. The University of New England emerged from humble beginnings in 1831, I didn't know that, and has since grown to become one of the largest private universities in Maine, with campuses in Portland, Biddeford, and Tangier, Morocco. Along with robust offerings through UNE Online, the university plays a key role in Maine's workforce development and is home to Maine's only medical school, the only dental school in northern New England, and other leading health profession programs. This morning, we are joined by President and CEO of the University of New England, Dr. James Herbert, to discuss the modern challenges facing colleges and universities and how UNE has risen to meet them, while in the process of moving their medical school from Biddeford to Portland. And I just learned that he's leaving, maybe right after this, shortly, to go to DC to testify in front of the Senate on how UNE is addressing the healthcare workforce shortage. So he's got a lot going on. We're really happy to have his time here with us this morning. So please welcome to the stage, Dr. James Herbert.
Whoa, you okay?
That could have been trouble.
Thank you so much, Britt. I really appreciate the warm introduction. And thank you also to Quincy, a good friend, and it's just such a pleasure to be here. And, you know, I've been in Maine only 5.5 years, but those who know me know how passionate I am about Maine. I'm sort of like a religious convert. You know how they're the most passionate about their faith? I'm that way about Maine. My wife and I absolutely love it here. And it's been, one of the things I love about Maine is how easy it is and how welcoming it is to get to know people. And I know so many people in this room, and I've had a chance to develop some really good friendships, and I'm just really grateful for that and grateful to be here. And I'm excited to tell a little bit about UNE's story. It's really a fascinating story and something I feel very passionate about. And Quincy told me and Britt that I have 3 hours, is that right? So once I get talking about this, I can get a little enthusiastic and go on and on. So I'm gonna do my best to not do that and to be brief. So it really is an inspirational story at UNE and the role that we play in the state. Let me see if I can work this. So Britt mentioned that UNE has come from humble beginnings, and that is true. We do technically date back to 1831. We're actually 3 precursor institutions came together in various ways to form UNE. So the way we usually tell the story is St. Francis College on the Biddeford campus, which is at this location that you see right now, right where the Saco River meets the Gulf of Maine. Small college formed, it was a high school originally, started back in the 50s to serve the French-speaking immigrants from Quebec, the sons of these immigrants who came to work in the mills and were discriminated against, were not allowed to go to high school, and needed a place to study. And so they were welcomed by these Franciscan brothers at this tiny little high school at this location, which then became a junior college and became a college. But as a small college, it was struggling. And in the 70s, the New England College of Osteopathic Medicine formed, and this was a grassroots effort of physicians who put together this college because there was no medical school in Maine. Those 2 entities joined in the late 70s to become the University of New England. And at the time, people thought, this is kind of crazy. You've got this small little tiny college, and you've got this fledgling medical school that was literally operating out of trailers, came together, and the University of New England, it sounded a bit pretentious. The president at the time said, we will grow into the name. And that's, I think, what's happened. And so then fast forward 20 years later, Westbrook College here in Portland off of Stevens Avenue, which that was the piece that was dates back to 1831. And Westbrook College had fallen on hard times as well. And so there was a merger between UNE, that precursor 20-year-old organization, and Westbrook College to become the modern UNE. And we've really grown since that time. So it's kind of an scrappy beginnings in terms of those 3 entities coming together. So even though on our logo it says 1831, we're really only about 30 years old as an institution. But one of the things that is still animates our mission is providing access to a life-changing education to students for whom it wouldn't otherwise be accessible. And it's in that sense that we often describe UNE, or I do, as a private university with a public mission. We're very much focused on workforce development. We're keen to look at where there are opportunities we're constantly engaged in market research, looking at where the opportunities are in the workforce, where the needs are, and how we can address those. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But that mission of access really is deeply rooted in our DNA. As I mentioned, St. Francis College offering access to education for students who were otherwise denied it. Westbrook College, starting back in 1831, from the day they opened their doors, admitted women to higher education at a time when the doors were closed to women in higher ed almost everywhere. And so that mission continues with us today. One way that manifests itself is our embracing first-generation college students. Over 30% of our undergraduates are now first generation. That's to say their parents didn't go to college. And this is something I feel very passionately about because I myself am a first-generation college student. I grew up in very humble blue-collar background and worked actually as a deckhand on a shrimp boat all through middle school and high school in South Texas. And it just sort of by a twist of fate, I ended up going to college, and it completely changed the trajectory of my life. And so we want to impart that same experience to our students today. So we do have this very strong commitment to first-generation students. We also are opening our doors to students from all different kinds of backgrounds. It's a very welcoming community, and we have students from all different kinds of backgrounds. In terms of diversity, our students of color, for example, have doubled in the 5 years that I've been here. And so it's an exceptionally welcoming place. We ask our students, what's your part? Our philosophy is that every single student needs to find their path in the way that they can contribute to the larger mission of the university. We've become, as Britt noticed, Maine's largest provider of healthcare professionals to the state. So when people think of UNE, oftentimes they do think of our healthcare programs, and that is a big part of what we do. He mentioned we have Maine's only medical school, Northern New England's only dental school. We also have a lot of other onlys, the only PA program, the only nurse anesthesia program. And not only do we have these programs, but we also have very, very good outcomes. Our clinical board scores for these health programs are routinely the highest in the state and amongst the highest in the nation. So we have our match rate for our medical school, for example, last year was 99%. We only had one student who didn't match, who then eventually did match. So this is really about as high as you can get. So we have very good outcomes. And again, this doesn't mean we're entering the highly, highly elite students, but we're taking students and really giving them a transformative experience. We're also very committed to doing what we can to keep these students in Maine. So with regard to our undergraduates, about 15 years ago, 70% of our students came from Maine, 30% from away. And now that's flipped, and we actually have more than 70%, a little bit over 70% of our undergraduates come from away. But what we're really committed to doing is trying our best to incentivize them to stay in Maine after graduation. And the same holds true with our graduate and professional programs, such as our medical students. So to just give you one statistic to drive that home, our medical students, if they do a third-year rotation, so part of their 4 years of medical school, if that third year they do a clerkship in Maine, which most of them do, then in the past 5 years, between 35 and 53% of those students return to Maine to practice after residency, even if they do their residency in another state. We don't have enough residency programs, what we call graduate medical education, that we need many more of those in Maine, and that's something that we're working on with partners with Maine Health, Northern Light, and others. But even if they go away for residency, if they've done a rotation in Maine, they come back to Maine. And the same with our dental students. We've now placed dentists all across the state, including in small towns in the rim counties of underserved areas in rural Maine. So we're very focused on meeting the healthcare needs of underserved populations throughout Maine, and especially in the rural areas. So this is something that we're very focused on, is incentivizing students to stay in Maine. And on the undergraduate side, I'll talk more, I've focused a lot on healthcare, but about some of our other programs, like our programs in business and entrepreneurship, for example. And one of the keys in keeping students in Maine is connecting them with really good internship training opportunities. And so that's something that we also do and we're working on. We're also looking at growing our programs wherever we can. Where there's an availability, a place to grow them, we do. So for example, our nursing programs in the past 10 years have grown 300%, and we're still adding to those nursing programs. We're getting ready to expand our medical school from 165 students per class to 200 per class with the move to Portland. So we're always looking to grow the programs where we can. There's some challenges with that, and that's part of what I'll be talking about to the Senate committee tomorrow, but we're working on it. This is just a slide, and I won't, this is kind of a lot of detail here, but I just wanted to emphasize that we place our physicians all across the state. We don't just train people to stay in Portland. Obviously, there's a lot of folks at Maine Med and Mercy and other, Martins Point, other places here in Portland, but we actually send our students all over the state and all of the corners. The economic impact is obvious. I mean, you have to have a healthy workforce in order to have healthy workers and fuel the rest of the economy. But an interesting statistic is that each physician who sets up practice in one of these areas generates $1.7 million annually in payroll from the 23 jobs that support that practice. And so each of these physicians that we're able to place around the state has a big economic impact in and of itself. But UNE is, despite our strength and our major footprint in the health sciences, is actually much more than just health sciences. We're a comprehensive university that has programs in all kinds of areas. Our marine programs are one of our other big strengths, and this is one of our fastest growing areas. Our marine programs have been nationally ranked by two different entities as being among the top 10 in the nation. We have a really special location on the Biddeford campus, right where the Saco meets the Gulf of Maine. And that's where our marine science center, that's where our campus sits, but our marine science center is literally right on the water. It's one of the only places, the only one I know of, at least on the East Coast, where a student can roll out of their dorm bed, walk just a couple hundred yards to the Marine Sciences Center, get on a boat, go out into the Gulf of Maine, into our own island, Ram Island, just offshore, do work on our experimental seaweed farm or other field work, get back on the boat, come back in time for their next class. It's a really special location. So what we've done in the past, since I've been there, just the past few years, is we took that core marine science program and we've developed multiple tracks within that. So we have oceanography, marine biology, the more traditional science areas, but we've also developed a track in marine entrepreneurship. And this is the marine science meets business. And this is where students can work on developing a business within the marine ecosystem. I would just give you one example of a student who's done exactly that. We had a young woman who grew up working on a lobster boat. She comes from a lobstering family. And she noticed you probably all are familiar with the green crab problem. We have these invasive green crabs that are a real problem. And so you're supposed to, when the lobstermen catch these green crabs, they're supposed to discard them, not throw them back overboard. But of course that sometimes happens. And so and then of course you have the price of herring going up, and so the bait for lobster traps was also getting more expensive. So what she did is developed a process to treat the green crabs and to develop lobster bait, and did experiments in our Marine Science Center showing that the bait worked as well as traditional lobster bait. So she went and started buying the green crabs from the lobstermen right off the boats, would put them through this proprietary process she developed, would then turn them into lobster bait and then sell them back to the lobstermen as lobster bait for, and just slightly undercutting the price of the herring, and was able to build a business doing that. So she entered the Maine Light Green Challenge, she won first prize, took the money to buy a truck, and is now trying to scale her business. So just one example of the kinds of businesses that are coming out of that marine entrepreneurship program. We also have a program in marine affairs. This is the policy side. A lot of the jobs in the marine ecosphere have to do with policy, so a lot of work to be done there. So we've developed a program there. We have a partnership with the UMaine Law School where our students in that program can go directly into, in an accelerated fashion, get a maritime law degree as well. So it's a very exciting program. A few weeks ago, this is Ram Island in the background. You can see in the students snorkeling, and I actually went snorkeling with the students out there, which was a blast. One of the perks of being president is you get to do all these fun things with students, and I embrace that. So through all of this, as I mentioned, we have become Maine's largest private university, and we're constantly scanning the ecosystem, seeing where there are jobs that are needed. Another example of that is a couple years ago, actually just under 2 years ago, we saw that there were a lot of jobs in the criminal justice system that were not getting filled. So we stood up a criminal justice program pretty quickly, and it's already really taking off. It's booming. So we're having a lot of students who've just joined that program. But that illustrates another aspect of the university, which is that we tend to be quite nimble, quite agile, at least relative to most institutions of higher education. One reason I'm at UNE is that I'm a very impatient person, and I could not survive at most universities. I just couldn't do it because they move too slowly, too deliberative, and in today's economy, in today's climate, we can't do that. We have to be much more nimble. And this criminology program, I think, illustrates exactly that we saw a need and we were able to stand it up much more quickly. But that also means that if a program is not pulling its weight, and after a period of time of trying to figure out if we can make it work, if it's run its course, then we have to be willing to discontinue that program. And that's, it's always harder to do that than it is to stand up new programs, but we do both. And so we're able to stay quite agile. Another example on our online college, because we have, in addition to our face-to-face campuses, we have a robust online college. We're also looking at ways where there's a need, and we're standing up right now, for example, a program in emergency management, because various municipalities have indicated that there's a need for the graduate training in that space. So that's just one example of over a dozen programs that we're currently developing in that college. So through this various kind of work of being intentional about looking where the needs are, the workforce needs, as we develop programs, we actually are able to defy the enrollment trends that are happening at most places in New England. And in fact, this current year, we entered the largest class in our history at a time when most colleges are shrinking. That presents its own challenges in terms of where you put them and feed them and that sort of thing, but thankfully that's a good problem to have, and we've worked that out. UNE has, let me see if I can get this to advance here. I've touched on this, but we have 3 very distinct campuses in addition to our online program. The Biddeford campus I've talked about, gorgeous campus. I invite all of you to come visit. It's right there, right at the mouth of the Saco. And that's our core undergraduate campus. Our campus here in Portland is the old Westbrook campus, and we, through a land swap with the Army National Guard, we acquired the old Armory building on Stevens Avenue, which is now the Girard Innovation Hall, and there's one of Portland's largest meeting places, and just a wonderful opportunity there. This is where, and I'll talk in a minute about the new medical school facility, which is appended to that old Armory building on Stevens Avenue. The Portland campus is a stately, quaint, quintessential New England campus, college campus. That's what it looks like. Biddeford campus, a very different feel. The residential oceanfront, waterfront campus in Biddeford. So the Portland campus has essentially become our health sciences campus. All of our health science programs, with the exception of medicine, are on the Portland campus now. And when we move medicine there, it's going to create a really unique campus. In fact, it's unique in the sense that there's not another place in New England that will have the concentration of diverse healthcare programs on a single footprint. So if you go down to Boston, the big boys in Boston, BU, Harvard, Tufts, they have their medical school, their dental school, but they're not all co-located on a single footprint. And I'll talk in a minute about why that's important and the advantages that that gives us. And then we have a campus, believe it or not, in Tangier, Morocco, which is very cool. And this is where we send students to study abroad. And it's a Tangier's, I don't know how many of you have been there, it's a really unique place. It's sort of the crossroads of civilization where North Africa, Europe, and the Middle East all come together. And we take our students, many of whom, as I mentioned, those first-generation students have never studied abroad. Many of them have never been abroad except maybe crossing over into Canada, if that counts as being abroad. And then we plop them down in the middle of Tangier, Morocco. And it is truly a life-changing experience. I can't tell you how many of them I've talked to who it's just opened their eyes to the broader world in a way that they didn't realize before. Part of what we do at UNE is emphasize global experiences. So we're very focused, we're very place-based in terms of our roots in Maine, but we want our students to understand how that relates to the larger global world. And so this campus in Tangier really provides a very unique experience for them. And then they use Tangier as a stepping point to go to various other places. We take them down into the Sahara where they ride on camels and go visit little villages and have all kinds of experiences. But they also use it as a platform to go into Spain, to Italy, to France, and explore Europe. So at UNE, our students study abroad at 4 times the national average. And we concentrate on 4 primary locations: our own campus in Tangier, as well as partnerships in France, Spain, and Iceland. And the Iceland partnerships are fairly new, and that's something that we've developed just since I've been there. And then we also have study abroad courses where they go all over the world. We just had a group just came back from Cuba and another group from Belize, so we have students all over the place. But the Tangier campus is really special. And I mentioned already UNE Online. Traditionally, we had certificate and graduate degree programs at UNE Online, and we still do, and we're actually building additional ones. But we're also moving pretty aggressively into the non-credit bearing continuing education market. This is upskilling workers, and we do this in partnership. We have freestanding classes and programs in that, but we also are partnering with various businesses and municipalities to develop programs that are needed, that are tailor-made for those programs. And so that's something, if anybody's interested in, happy to have a conversation about that. We don't try to be all things to all people. If it's not something that we can do well, then we won't do it. But if it's something that we can do well, then we're happy to partner and build those programs. The other thing that people may not realize about UNE in terms of how we've grown up is we've actually become a research powerhouse. So in addition to, we have research in the marine sciences, as I mentioned, a lot of aquaculture research, for example. We have scholarship in the humanities and the social sciences and all of that. But our biggest footprint is biomedical research. And this dovetails really nicely with the larger high-tech, biotech, and biomedical emphasis that is growing up in Portland. And this is in partnership with our pharmacy school. But just as an illustration of this, we have the most amount of NIH funding of any college or university in Maine. So that's just an indication of the strength of our biomedical research. And this biomedical research, by the way, in addition to contributing to basic science, it has tangible benefits for the people of Maine. And I could talk more about that, but suffice it to say that it's not all just ivory tower stuff. It actually does translate into real benefits for Maine. So that's a little bit about UNE. I want to touch on some of the major challenges facing higher education today and then just briefly what we're doing to address those. And I've already touched on that in terms of workforce in particular. The biggest is the demographic decline. This is really something that's affecting every college and university in New England in one way or another. So, as you probably know, for the past 2 decades, there's been fewer and fewer high school students graduating. Basically, the number of students is decreasing in many areas of the country, especially the Midwest and the Northeast. And within the Northeast, the region that's hit hardest is New England. And within New England, guess which state is hit the hardest? Is Maine, in terms of the drop in the number of high school students. And so most college students come from 100 miles of where they went to high school across the nation. That's just sort of a general rule. And there are exceptions, of course, but just in general. So what that means is we have fewer customers, if you will, fewer students needing colleges in New England. And we have the greatest concentration of colleges and universities in the nation in New England. So it's a classic supply and demand problem. And so this means that as enrollments decline, there's fewer students entering college, and this is about to get much worse in 25-26 due to what's called the demographic cliff, when we're going to see that decline that's been going like this is going to suddenly take a more precipitous drop. And that's due to the financial crisis in 2008 when people stopped making as many babies. And that hasn't really recovered since then. And so this is putting a lot of pressure on colleges and universities. It's impacted, since most colleges and universities, whether public or private, are tuition dependent, meaning the majority of their revenues come from tuition. That strains budgets. That results in layoffs and benefit curtailments, and higher ed in general is harder to adjust your workforce than it is in most industries because of things like tenure and just accreditation standards and that sort of thing. So it puts a lot of pressure on colleges and universities. Smaller liberal arts colleges are most at risk, and we are averaging right now in the United States, 1 college per month is closing. So there's a lot of closures and a lot of pressure on those that remain open. Now, the highly elite, highly selective colleges, the Ivies, the Bowdens, they're going to be fine. They have the name reputation that they've got plenty of applicants. They don't have to worry about this. But the rest of everybody else has to be very focused on this. But with all problems, it also presents opportunities. And as I mentioned at UNE, we've been able to defy those trends despite the challenges. But it is a challenge for sure. The other thing is the questioning the value of higher education that we've seen just in the past few years. And I think this goes right along with the political polarization that we're seeing in our country. We live, at least in my lifetime, I think we live in the most politically polarized time that I've seen, where people are living in their own bubbles, their own sort of ideological bubbles that are fueled by social media algorithms, fueled by partisan 24-hour cable TV, and we've increasingly lost the art of conversation, of discourse across differences. And I think it's a huge problem, and you see this in the way the government is operating, for example. Now, universities, you would hope, would be places that would be meeting grounds where ideas could be shared and where that discourse does happen. Because after all, that's what universities, since antiquity, when they were first set up, right? The very first academy that Aristotle set up, that's what the heart of universities has been about. It's been about places where we have the hard conversations. But unfortunately, most universities have abdicated that responsibility. I view it as a sacred responsibility that we're supposed to foster difficult conversations about issues. And I'll be frank, that's not what's happening at most universities today. People in my role are running for the hills, doing whatever they can to just sort of keep the peace and not really foster those kinds of conversations. And at UNE, one of the things we're doing is to try to address that, and I'll talk more about that in just a couple of minutes. But I feel strongly that universities have a responsibility to foster difficult conversations, and that for the most part we haven't done that. And that's led a lot of folks in the public to be very skeptical. They view universities as increasingly out of touch with mainstream America, with having a very progressive bias and not welcoming all voices to the table. And you all know the examples of this. I don't have to go into it, but it's some of it's a caricature and it's overplayed, but there is some truth to it. And I think that that's contributed to the skepticism about higher education. And the other piece, of course, is the cost. And there's no doubt that the cost of higher ed has risen more rapidly than inflation. Not right now, actually, because inflation's so high, but over the past couple of decades. There's no question about that. It's still the case that higher education, and I would actually argue, is the value proposition is very, very strong, but we've not done a good enough job of making that case. There are high upfront costs, but for the most part, the investment is worth it. If higher ed were a stock, you should go be very bullish and buy all of it you could, because overall, the return on investment is very clear. Now, I'm not suggesting that everybody should go to college. There are other pathways, but what I will tell you is there's no question, the data are very clear, that a college education way more than pays for itself. It puts you, in terms of your earning potential, your risk of being unemployed at any point in your life, greatly changes with a college education. And the media stories about the barista working, with $150,000 of debt and, working for minimum wage, I mean, there are isolated stories like that, but it's not at all the typical norm. So again, the value proposition, I was just talking about this. Now, what are we doing at UNE? First of all, in terms of the demographic decline, we are, as I mentioned before, recruiting from a much broader range of students. But the key thing here is you have to have quality programs, and you have to, the number one thing that parents are interested in when we have parents coming to our open house, and by the way, this is not just true at UNE, it's true everywhere, even at the Ivies. They want to get their kids off the payroll. They want to make sure that they're setting their kids up for an ability to have a meaningful and good career. And of course, they want all of the rest that goes with higher ed, but that's the fundamental thing. So you have to have programs that are aligned with market needs so that students can get a job, and provide them, in addition to that, at the same time, the sort of classic liberal education that the habits of mind that are going to allow them to reinvent themselves going forward, because the world is changing so rapidly. You can't just prepare them for the job on day one, but you need to prepare them for the jobs that are going to, the flexibility to have the jobs that are going to be coming over the next couple of decades, for the rest of their career, in fact. So this is exactly what we're trying to do at UNE. We've also enhanced our student life. We've offered a lot of additional athletic opportunities, for example, and other aspects of our student life to round out the experience. So these are ways that we're addressing, and we've been able to be successful about recruiting students. In terms of the cultural polarization issue, this is something I feel very strongly about and could go on and on about. But we're being very intentional at UNE about creating an atmosphere where, in the same way that we focus, like most places do, on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the traditional categories, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation and identity, that sort of thing, we also add something which is viewpoint diversity, ideological diversity, that we're interested in bringing people from various viewpoints together and to have the hard conversations. And in fact, it's precisely the hardest conversations that we ought to be emphasizing, the things that, that most people don't talk about in polite company, we need to be talking about. And so we've set up this, we call this our Marketplace of Ideas initiative, and we have a bunch of programs going to promote this. I just established an award, $1,000 for faculty and for professional staff who promote difficult conversations, either inside the classroom or outside the classroom, to try to incentivize more of this. We provide training for our faculty on how to mediate conversations. And I want to emphasize, all of this, the key is being willing to have the hard conversations, but in a constructive, civil, thoughtful way. It does no good just to bring people together and have them yell at each other. So we're trying to train students on how you can have conversations across differences productively. And this also, by the way, ties back into a couple of things. It helps us recruit students, because we can say to families, if you're interested in your child being able to develop these skills, this is a place that is welcoming in that regard. And then I think it also helps them with getting jobs, because if you graduate from college and you've been in an ideological bubble and you go out into the real world, you're going to meet people who don't necessarily share your biases and assumptions. And so I think it helps with that as well. One of the programs that we've developed is called the President's Forum. And this is something that I developed shortly after I got here. And the basic idea is we bring two different speakers who have different perspectives on a controversial and timely topic together to have a moderated conversation. It's not a formal Oxford-style debate, but it's a conversation, but it's a constructive, civil conversation. And we have a lot of audience participation as well. And the goal is not only to do a deep dive into the topic, but also to help model for students, and in fact for our faculty, for others in the community, how to have a constructive conversation about a difficult topic. So we've done these on topics like gun control, defund the police, the whole policing issue, and we're getting ready to do one. You're all invited, March the 6th on the Biddeford campus, 6 p.m., March the 6th, Monday, on transgender athletes and competitive sports. So this is exploring the question of the issues around fairness and inclusion and that sort of thing of trans women participating in sports, competing against biological women in sports. So this is something that we're very excited about. But you can see this is probably, I don't know if there's any other topic that's more contentious today, but rather than running away from it, we're embracing it, and we're going to have this conversation, constructive conversation. And we have two very accomplished speakers on either side who are willing to engage in a constructive conversation about this. So anyway, enough about that. In terms of the value proposition here, we're trying to tell the story better. We have kept our tuition increases lower than the national average for the past decade. 98% of our students get financial aid in one form or another. So our students graduate with only a little over $1,000 more debt than students from the public system, for example. So UNE actually is affordable, and the value proposition, again, if you look at the earning potentials and the rest, it's very clear. We're trying, in terms of our pedagogical model, to inculcate 3 distinct skill sets in our students. First is deep disciplinary skills. So if you're going to be a nurse, you're going to be a business major, you need to really know your stuff in a deep discipline way. The second is what we call habits of mind. These are things like cultural competence, numerical literacy, communication skills, teamwork, being able to have the sort of skills that are going to allow you that transcend a particular discipline to allow you to reinvent yourself over time. And then the third skill set is basic social skills, like showing up on time for work. I know it sounds like silly, but these are the sorts of skills that employers tell us that many college students are lacking these days, and so we're trying to inculcate that skill set as well. We're very focused on ROI. We're constantly assessing the impact of our programs, and I'm proud to say that for the 5th year in a row, UNE has been rated as the #1 college in Maine for students getting jobs. So 6 months after graduation, the employment rate for students in their fields of study were #1 in the state for the 5th year in a row. I'm also happy to report this is another, just a quick example of this ROI. Right now, if you look at student loan default rates, well, they're 0 right now because the Biden administration suspended student loan repayments, but that's about to change and they're going to kick back in. But right before that happened, you can look at how many students default on their student loans. And on average in the US, and Maine mirrors the US average, it's a little over 8% of students default on their student loans. At UNE, our student loan default rate is 1.8%. So it's 1.8% compared to a national average of 8%. And that's not because our students are coming from wealthy families who are able to pay back their loans. It's because they're getting good paying jobs and they're able to pay them back. So basically the takeaway is we're very focused on workforce issues, providing students a positive experience and having a big impact on our state and our region. Now in terms of our future plans and aspirations. We're investing in a number of new facilities that we're building. The biggest one is our medical school facility. This is a $93 million project to build the state-of-the-art facility in Portland, annexed to the old Armory building, to move our College of Medicine there. And I mentioned before about how this is going to create that unique health sciences campus. It's also going to contribute to Portland's bioscience ecosphere, biotechnology ecosphere. We're working in close partnership with the Roux Institute. We have some accelerated programs where our students can, in an accelerated pathway, go into some of those master's programs, and we're excited to work with other industries here, Covetrus and a number of others that we're working with in Portland. So it's going to be a very exciting project. We're also focusing, though, as I mentioned, on other areas. I mentioned the criminology. Business and entrepreneurship is a big investment area for us. Those programs have doubled in size in the past couple of years, and I see a lot of potential there. We have a really cool makerspace where we encourage our students to come and to tinker and to explore ideas, both digital and traditional hands-on things. In addition to that, I mentioned our online college and the programs that we're doing to try to upskill the workforce in Maine there. So basically, in closing, I really believe that when we thrive, Maine thrives, and vice versa. We're very connected to our state, very connected to the region in ways that I've mentioned. And I'm just having a great time. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. I'm having just the time of my life. My wife, Lynn, and I are very involved in campus life. The best part, we have a couple of UNE students with us today. The very best part of my job is spending time with students, and we take every chance that we can to do that. So that's a little bit about the UNE story. I've got a lot more I could say, but I promised Quincy I would try to keep it a little bit brief. But I'd be really delighted to address any questions. So thank you. Yes.
Good morning, James. Susan Morris over
Hi,
here.
Susan.
Lovely to see you. I applaud so much the leadership you're demonstrating and the nimbleness at responding to the needs of your various stakeholders. I have to take 1 second as a Canadian to just comment that crossing the border into Canada definitely It counts. It requires a passport. There are lots of different languages, not just French, in Canada. Apparently our education system is a tad different. Apparently healthcare is a little different. So it may not be as sexy in many people's mind as going to Morocco, but just let it be known, Canada cuts it, and please encourage more people to have that experience. There, thank you very much. Yes, I'm the Honorary Counsel for Canada. Wait a minute, James, hang on. I just had to
But I just have to say, I'm a huge Canada fan.
I'm sure you are.
Et j'adore le Canada, je parle français aussi, alors j'adore travailler au Québec. Et puis, I love Canada. It's, yeah, so all I was trying to say is that, absolutely, one of the things I love about living in Maine is the relationship with Canada and the fact that, you can just drive to Quebec. It's like the fastest way to go to Europe, right? You just drive, it's wonderful. However, students going to Canada is still a little bit different than plopping them down in Tangier. Just saying.
Understand.
But, yeah.
Alors, j'ai une question. Mais alors, en anglais. Yeah.
Allons-y, vas-y.
I love that you are a big thinker, and what I'm wondering is, I'll use the word disruption, and I'm wondering if there is the potential for disruption in higher ed. For this question, let's focus on healthcare. And I'm just wondering, do you see the potential for change in the prerequisites for getting in? The classic model of classwork, doing residencies, the amount of years it takes, who the professors are, all that. I'm giving you the chance. Go big. What do you see happening, especially with the current need? Well, it's not current, the long-term change that we see. Thanks.
Merci bien. So there, in fact, did you read, you probably read the testimony. You must have gotten an advanced copy or something, because you just touched on some of what I'll be talking about tomorrow with the Senate. We need all kinds of reforms. And I could go on and on about this. I'll be brief. Some ways that we're already able to address disrupting the way the healthcare workforce has changed is by, for example, a new partnership that we have with Maine Health, where we train CNAs at Maine Health to become nurses on site. Rather than having to quit your job or put it on suspended animation to come back to school to then go through a traditional program, can we give people the degree training so that they meet all of the standards, the licensure standards, but do it while they're still working on site? And so what we do is we bring our faculty to Maine Med, partner with the folks there, and do the training on site. We also have developed an accelerated program, and by the way, we're talking with Northern Light now about doing the same thing there. We have developed an accelerated program where if you have a degree, let's say an English degree or a psychology degree, that we can actually help you go into the health professions in an accelerated way and become a nurse or another health professional. So those are some ways that we're doing it. Part of what the problem is the way that healthcare training works. Each discipline is governed by laws, state laws, which are in turn determined by the accreditation agencies, the specialist accreditors, which are frankly, a lot of it is guild-driven. And there's some work that we need to do to break down barriers there, because it forces folks to work in a very sort of discipline-specific silos. And there's other ways of doing things, and we can learn from neighbors across the world of how to do a better job of our health care workforce training. So yes, I agree to all of that. It's not as easy, though, as a university deciding to just change their model of training, because you still have the licensure and accreditation standards that dictate a lot of this. So we have to work on how we can be as creative as possible within the current accreditation standards, and then also work on trying to change those standards. I mentioned before, one of the biggest things we need in Maine is, and we're working with the state right now with Senator Jackson about getting some legislation around this, we need more support for the healthcare entities. So in a nutshell, what's happened is over the past 2 decades, the margins have shrunk in hospitals and clinics so much that their priority is on having the physician or the provider pump out as many procedures as they can, because again, the margins have shrunk. Back in the old days, there was enough, I don't want to fat in the system, if you will, there was enough leverage that people could have trainees. Having a trainee with you slows you down as a provider. And so but in days where those margins have shrunk, it makes it harder to justify having that trainee, even though the providers want to do it and the healthcare entities want it as well, because that's their future workforce. And so we need support for our partners in the clinical settings to be able to help open up more clinical training slots, because that's the bottleneck that keeps us from expanding our programs further. And the medical residency thing in particular, I mentioned that to get more physicians to stay in Maine, we don't need more medical students. We have enough of those. We need more residency programs. So we're working on all of that, but there's lots of disruption to be done. And I have no problem breaking things if it's gonna help move the needle. Yes?
Yeah, Jim, thank you. It's great to meet you this morning. Dan Raposa, Northeast Credit Union Foundation. Yeah. I commend University of New England with what you've done on the Biddeford campus. As we chatted earlier, I was there 20 years ago when the planning started. My question is about your students, especially coming out of the COVID situation. I'm familiar with the University of New Hampshire, my alma mater, sitting next to a UMaine flagship university grad here, talking about his daughter being a grad of UNE. Housing and food insecurity issues as it faces the challenge on your campus. Could you speak to that in the Biddeford market in particular, and how you see the housing situation and food insecurity issues affecting students at the University of New England?
Oh, thank you. So we, to be honest, I don't think we have a big problem with food insecurity. We've addressed that. We do have a food pantry that we keep stocked, and any student that needs it can go there. We have a program, so if students run out of meal swipes with our cafeteria program, for example, we can give them more, without them having to pay. So I think we have a safety net that we've built around food insecurity. In terms of housing, On the undergraduate side, it's not as big of an issue because we have a 3-year residency requirement, so students live on campus for those first 3 years. That last year when they live off campus, they've so far been able to find housing. A lot of students live in the local community in Biddeford. There's a lot of vacation homes that people like having students in to help just sort of, make sure that the place is taken care of as long as they leave in the summer when they come back. So that's one place. And then a lot of folks live in Old Orchard Beach and the other surrounding areas. Where the bigger challenges with housing is in Portland, with our graduate students in Portland, who are increasingly finding it more and more difficult to find housing. And but I don't need to tell you all about the Portland housing market. That goes way beyond us. So that is something that we're working right now with a couple of partners looking at exploring building graduate housing for our students. But anything that can be done, you just saw today, there's an article, Jim Brady's building another hotel, but this time also with some housing built in there, which will help. Anything we can do to expand the Portland housing market is needed. So food insecurity, I think we got that one. Housing, Biddeford, we're okay. Portland, not so much.
We have time for one last question.
Good morning. Susan Gaddy from Maine Medical Center, Department of Vocational Services. My question's around, you're talking about the challenges in higher ed, and where does mental health challenges fit in that? 25% of the United States is navigating a mental health condition, and working with people just out of college, helping them find their first jobs, it's increasing as a challenge for our recent grads. I'm wondering what UNE is doing that might be a little different than other colleges and universities. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for the question. So again, something near and dear to my heart. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and that's what I did for most of my academic career before I got lured into the dark side of higher ed administration. Is I had a big research lab and did research and trained future psychologists. And so the mental health area is something I'm very familiar with and I very much interested in. First of all, our students these days are having mental health struggles at an unprecedented rate. And that's something that we have a program at UNE with our own students that we call the Resilience Project. So in addition to doing what most other colleges are doing, which is hiring more counselors and providing more services, 24-hour supports, that sort of thing, we're trying to help our students become more confident and become more resilient to face the hardships of life. And rather than focus on a fragility model, focus on a strength-building model. So that's something that we're doing with our own students. In terms of the mental health workforce, that's another thing we're very much focused on. Right now, we're looking at building a psychiatric nursing program, so a nurse practitioner program. There's a desperate need for all kinds of mental health professionals in Maine, but psychiatric services in particular are just incredibly short supply. And frankly, there is no way we're going to be able to train enough psychiatrists to come and practice in Maine to meet all the needs. And so psychiatric nurse practitioners are really the best bet for meeting those needs. And so we're looking to begin a program now in partnership with Maine Behavioral Health and other entities in psychiatric nursing. And one of the other ways that we're dealing with the mental health workforce is something really, an opportunity that we have in Maine that has not been leveraged enough, which is, believe it or not, at the bachelor's level. So most mental health professionals have to be either master's or doctorally trained, but in Maine, we have something called a mental health rehabilitation counselor, I think is the name, something, I may be getting the details wrong, but it only requires a bachelor's degree. So we've developed a program at UNE in that so that our students majoring in psychology or nursing or one of the allied health fields can get this certification, and you actually come out, take an exam, you have a certification at a bachelor's level to be able to work in entry-level mental health jobs, because there's a big need for that in the workforce as well, right? So working in various settings with a mental health professional at an entry level. So that's something unique at UNE that we're doing, and we're really growing that program as well. So thank you for the question. A lot more work that needs to be done there. So I think I'm done, right? So, but happy to. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. James Herbert. That was outstanding for joining us this morning, for taking time out of your day. Good luck in D.C. I can say we're proud to have you down there. This was just outstanding to hear about all the things that are going on at the University of New England, both from the educational and dealing with the challenges and being nimble. There was just so many takeaways from this that I've got and learned, and really exciting. So thank you so much for being here. To stay apprised of the future updates, we encourage everyone to sign up for the Chamber's Advocacy and Events newsletter by scanning the QR codes found on the signs at your tables. You can find a complete list of all the Chamber's upcoming events at the Chamber's website, portlandregion.com. We hope to see you at the next Eggs and Issues, Thursday, March 16th, where we're going to be hearing from several local partners and principalities all about the work they're doing to welcome new Mainers into our workforce. So thank you again, Dr. Herbert, for being here, and have a great day, everyone. Thanks so much.